That dream materialized in the 1987 production of The Hero's Journey, the on-hour film from which the book you hold in your hands emerged. Zeal for something other than sports and church makes most Midwestern Presbyterian stents, and both of my aging parents clearly would have been more comfortable if this, Campbell, interest, had been supplanted by my energetic support of a local congregation, or be more attention to my medical activities and financial future. Since I had poor judgment and bad manners not to listen to mentors and parents, I have, since the inception of my long and intricate involvement with Joseph Campbell, tried not to embrace him as a cult figure and have good and irreverent friends who assure me that I keep thinking and feeling for myself. But as I try to place those years in perspective, the experience of it all feels more like love. Not specifically love of Camp Bell, but love for what happens to others when they see and hear him. Their pleasure and their growth were what kept me working on this project for more than a decade. Of course, the awareness of what would happen to others as they encountered Campbell started with my own experiences. Forward. At age 39, in 1972, I took a sabbatical to complete a research project in homicide. While closeted in the library, I discovered that the earliest known written references to violence were mythological, and to my surprise the dynamics of domestic violence described in the ancient myths and the patterns of domes. Tick violence in contemporary American life showed striking parallels. So I set about to read Joseph Campbell 4-volume Masks of God. As I finished, I realized that Campbell was remarkably connecting the symbolic, psychological, spiritual, and artistic images of humanity in ways that an army of scientists since Darwin had been doing in order to understand biological patterns. Along the way, something in me more than intellect had been fed by these books. As I completed them, I felt differently about myself and the world. I felt at home. I wanted to learn more about what Campbell had to say, and, like many others, I was curious about the man himself. The more I read, the more I was moved by an incessant urge to see that Campbell's sweeping scholarship and capacity for tolerantly blending the worlds of mythologies were made available to audiences outside the scholarly community. Since I was not a television professional myself, I formed a partnership with the late Greg Sparlin, who was. Campbell, however, initially rejected our proposal to transfer his work into the television medium with their mark that his proper medium was print. It took many meetings to persuade him otherwise, but when we finally go this commitment, I was certain that we could get others properly exposed to Campbell's scholarship and vitality, and they would experience their own deepening of soul. It didn't matter to me at the time that few agreed with this conviction. As with many creative projects, there were many false starts. By late 1981, I was becoming increasingly concerned about Joe's health, since he had experienced 2 severe bouts of pneumonia within 6 months. While Hella could find and sounded as eloquent as ever, the physician in me was worried. Joe was approaching 80, and the restal was no adequate filmed record of him and his work. Yes, he had published many Super B books, but I felt strongly, as George Lucas was later to say, that there was a life force that poured out of him, causing his Audi ancestors to actively initiate their own spiritual adventure. With an increased sense of urgency, I redoubled my efforts. The formal filming of The Hero's Journey began in January of 1982 at Esalen, in Big Sur, California. With producer Bill Fries. Forward. Help. I correlated diverse group that ranged from Joe's close poet friend, Robert Bly, to Nobel laureate Roger Guilman, to a young woman who had never heard of Campbell before. My hope was that the mix of people, the skills of the director, David Kennard, the beauty and heritage of the setting, and the phenomenal life and energies of Joseph Campbell would prove a rich foundation for our film. Much of what you will discover in this book comes from the Conversations film at Esalen. Some 4 or 5 months later, ASWE were editing the film and poring over transcripts. I began to find myself besieged by a relentless inner voice. Inner voices, even if they were telling me to follow my bliss, were not something I was used to. But the zone kept saying, get Joe's next nationwide lecture series on videotape because it will be his last. Sadly, it was. Some people at their best in a relaxed, informal setting. The first cut of our film used a great deal of such footage. However, the more we worked on it, the clearer it became that Campbell was at his best when he chose the subject matter, when he was able to use the material that had perfected over many decades of lectures. Between 1982 and early 1985, a production crew followed Campbell around the country, videotaping his last major lecture tour. We recorded Psyche and Symbol in Taos, New Mexico. Transformations of Myth Through Time in Santa Fe, The Perennial Philosophy, Hinduism and Buddhism, at his wife Jean Erdmann's Open Air Theater in New York, The Western Way, The Arthurian Legends, and The Quest for the Grail, at the Palace of Fine Arts Theater in San Francisco, and Contemporary Mythologies, James Joyce and Thomas Mann, at the California Historical Society in San Francisco. We know we had a motherload of 50 hours off Campbell's most powerful lectures which will be available forever. I have since stopped hearing voices. As the production crew and I followed Campbell around this country, people kept coming up to him after his lectures and seminars asking, who is this man Campbell? How do you get a Betha person highs? An enduring curiosity about what he was and an enchantment with him and his as pervaded his audiences. It was these questions that provided the stimulus that led to the final form of the first film and, ultimately, to this book. Our final strategy for the film was to allow the viewer to process unconsciously his or her own life while watching the story of Joe's. Their own personal rites of passage, their recognition of forward, the importance of union with nature, their need to take their own path. In short, the trajectory that Joe Campbell lived out and so magnetically demonstrated in the breadth of his scholarship, would be discovered in the vignettes and stories, monologues and actions that we had filmed. Form, the highlight of the filmus. The awards dinner at the New York Arts Club in 1985, where Joseph Campbell was honored for his contributions to literature. Our film had time only 4 excerpts from the testimonials of George Lucas, Richard Adams, James Hillman, and others, and, as much as it pained us, we were forced to cut Joe's an acceptance speech. Fortunately, this book has allowed us to incorporate more complete coverage of that remarkable evening, as well as to include marvelous original material that time constrained TS excluded from the film. Joe always felt his ideas were more significant than his person. In the film and in the construction of this book, we have tried to make sure that it would be as wished it, that the ideas speak with all of the remarkable clarity that the man was capable of generating. The film version of The Hero's Journey, The World of Joseph Campbell premiered on the East Coast at the Museum of Modern Art and on the West Coast at the Directors Guild Theatre in the spring of 1987. Included in this book are excerpts from his last public appearance at the West Coast premiere program where, even as approached what himself called the death, he continued to provide new information and syntheses to his audiences. It was with great poignancy that I watched Joe receive his last standing ovations. Headed 4 months later, after much review of our transcripts and outtakes, I asked Phil Cusino, the associate producer of the film, who, along with co-producer Janelle Balnicki, wrote its narration, to construct this book. I had been consistently impressed with his important creative contributions to all aspects of the film and to his growing devotion to Joe and Jean Campbell, and he knew that they recognized and appreciated not only the breadth of his knowledge of my hand life, but the depth of his talent. In 1988, The National airing on PBS of The Hero's Journey, The World of Joseph Campbell, and Bill Moyer's 6-part series, Joseph Campbell and the Power of Myth, led to an explosive and broad response. This outpouring of interest, it seems to has confirmed that Joseph Campbell speaks to all of us. Stuart L. Brown Foe. Introduction. Joseph Campbell's long odyssey through the seas of ancient mythology was as much a spiritual quest as it was a scholarly one. Through his prodigious readings, writings, and travels, as well as his crossroad meetings with many of the century's most influential men and women, he discovered remarkable parallels in our world's mythological heritage and reinforcement for the deep conviction he had held since he was a young student, that there is a fundamental unity at the heart of nature. Truth is one, the sages speak of it by many names, he often quoted the Vedas. Tosin the size the constant truths of history became the burning point of his life. To bridge the abyss between science and religion, mind and body, east and west, with the timeless linkage of myths became his to scoff tasks. My hope, Hirodini's Prefacito the Hair with a Thousand Faces, is thought a comparative elucidation may contribute to the perhaps not quite desperate cause of those forces that are working in the present world for unification, not in the name of some ecclesiastical or political empire, but in the name of human mutual understanding. Campbell's comparative historical approach to mythology, religion, and literature, in contrast to the conventional scholars' emphasis on cultural differences, concentrated on similarities. He was convinced that the common the messer archetypes in our sacred introduction, stories and images transcended the variations or cultural manifestations. Moreover, he believed that their viewing of such primordial images in mythology as the hero, death and resurrection, the virgin birth, and the promised land, the universal aspects of the soul, the blood memories, could reveal our common psychological roots. They could even show us, a scene from below, how the soul views itself. Myths are masks of God, Herod, through which men everywhere have sought to relate themselves to the wonders of existence. The shock of recognition we receive from the timelessness of these images, from primal cultures to the most contemporary, he believed, was an illumination not only of our inward life but of the same deep spiritual ground from which all human life springs. So as Albert Einstein pursued a unified field theory for the energies of the outer realms, Joseph Campbell dedicated himself to forging a kind of unified field theory of the equally prodigious energies of the inner realms, the personifications of which we call the gods. And what physicists call the fabric of reality, Campbell called the net of gems, a sparkling metaphor from Hindu cosmology that is also an image for his own unique weaving together of myth, religion, science, and art. His teachers in those disciplines, he concluded, were all saying essentially the same thing. That there is a system of archetypal impulses that have stirred the human spirit throughout history. It is, Ash synthesized it, one grandiose song. The iconoclastic road Heduka scholar, teacher, and writer was not unlike the left-hand paths he discovered in myriad myths. What the Kena Upanishads call the crossing of a bridge as sharp as the edge of Erazor, the taking of the middle way of the Buddhists, or the entering of the dark forest of the Grail quest, where there is no way or path. Intuitively he followed his Tao of scholarship beyond the hallowed halls of traditional academia and into a spiritual and psychological view of mythology, which embraces the transcendent reality read Toby St. Sancha. Mons that can be directly experienced. This form of direct perception of what the mystics called cosmic consciousness is nothing less than a personal encounter with the gods. It is the healing vision of order underlying apparent chaos, the seizure of life-affirming beauty in the heart of darkness. If snatching the eternal out of the ever-fleeting is one of the great tricks of human existence, as Tennessee. Introduction. Williams said, then those who can experience eternity now, from Campbell's challenging perspective, become our tricksters, our spiritual guides. Campbell's decidedly unconventional career to prevent him used to joke of some prestige from his fellow scholars. But it was obvious to those of us who knew him that took great pride in being the maverick and the dilettante, the one who takes delight in. Ash once described his own mentor, the Indologist Heinrich Zimmer. He could afford to. His enthusiasm, literally his being full of the gods, had won in the hearts and minds of students early on in his career at Sarah Lawrence, and later, scores of artists. HISOWN fascination with the great stuff of myth turned thinking into an adventure, translated knowledge into wisdom. André veiled the personal relevance of mythology for those who heard or read him. Tothim he was far more than the popularizer, who trivializes his subject. He was what the French elegantly call the animator, the charismatic teacher who not only animates complex material for the average audience, but evokes what Vladimir Nabokov called the frisson, the telling shiver of truth about your own life. For that gift alone he became one of the most beloved teachers of our time. Yet after more than 50 years of teaching and more than 20 books, Campbell felt that his contribution was simply that he gave people the key to the realm of the muses, that marvelous realm beyond the visible one from which imagination and inspiration could guide us in shaping our lives. In that role Awasa. Modern Mystagogue, a guide through the often inscrutable mysteries of the ancient texts of Beowulf, Gilgamesh, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Egyptian mysteries, the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Arthurian romances, the American Indian myths, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity, as well as modern mythmakers, as James Joyce, Thomas Mann, and Pablo Picasso. In his rendering of these majestic narratives and images, Hedotus Thebotswayev, How to Read a Myth, the original title for The Hare with a Thousand Faces, symbolically, metaphorically, Sol Tully. But beyond a stallion for metaphorphosis, that is, his ability to read into these transformative riddles of life and death, Campbell personalized the classics like few scholars before him. To complement the rigorous methods of scholarship, he revived the art of hermeneutics, inventive interpretations in the spirit of the Hermes, the Soul Guide, and fused them with the glint M. Introduction. The eye regaling of a wise Irish storyteller. Insinuating to breathe new life into the old myths, as Albert Camus said each generation must do. Ashe did with one of his favorite tales, the Parsifal legend, when he threw down the gauntlet at the end of his Arthurian romance seminars. Swa it going to be the Grail quester, is it going to be the wasteland? Hewell Dask. Are you going to go on the creative selves quest, or are you going to pursue the life that only gives you security? Are you going to follow the star of the zeal of your own enthusiasm? Are you going to live the mythorus, the my th going to live you? And so emerged the ecstatic scholar, a breed of thinker thought long extinct since the age of scientific rationalism. It's not the agony of the quest, he often reminded his audiences, but the rapture of the revelation, giving new meaning to the old saw about rapture of the deep. Furthermore, Hewitt Anam, Ishley, life is not a problem to be solved but a mystery to be lived. But how is this possible? Can we no more than wait for the serendipitous encounter? How do we turn around the flight from mystery in this demythologized era with its overarching question, is nothing sacred anymore? How do we spare Thesham from the sublime? Joseph Campbell's patented response to the disenchantment of modern life was, find your life's true passion and follow it, follow the path that is no path, follow your bliss. When you have the unmistakable experience of the aha, then you'll know you're riding on the mystery. Campbell's irrepressible ergeta pursuis the essential knowledge, the hidden harmonies within the dream world of myths, legends, fairy tales, folklore, poetry, literature, and art, is reminiscent of what John Keats described in Shakespeare as circumnavigation of the soul. While Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung rescued the soul from the oblivion of the spiritual made realism of the 19th century with the study of depth psychology. Introduction. OGY, Campbell cross-cultural explorations, and those of a host of other modern religious historians and anthropologists like Mircea Eliade and Claude Lévi-Strauss, revived or moribund myths in their ancestral home of the stories and images of the soul. Together and alone, they were dreaming the myth onward, as Jung advised, reweaving the ancient story web. Campbell's sojourn inevitably took him to the perennial philosophy, the sublime theme he found in the ancient Hindu and Chinese pundits, Sufi and Christian mystics, poets and philosophers from Walt Whitman to Aldous Huxley, was that deep within the human soul is a mirror of divine reality. As above, so below, Tad Warnassi. Thwart that, the kingdom of Godis within us, here and now. Awakening to that mystical dimension where the very essence of the self is suddenly perceived to be one with the ultimate forces of nature. ISAT once the secret in the transforming journey of human life. You are that mystery which you are seeking to know, Campbell concluded. This spiritual perspective, Campbell believed, is not only timeless but universal. He had a greater respect for the wisdom, lore of the shamans and sages of antiquity as did for the creative visions of contemporary artists and scientists. Accordingly, like many other perennial philosophers, Campbell had very little patience, if no disdain, for any individual or chosen people mythologies that exclude dothers from divine revelation or claim to possess exclusive knowledge of the vigorously thought to be the fundamental truths, the sacred constants, awful people. Every people is a chosen people, he insisted. Every deity is a metaphor, a mask, for the ultimate mystery ground, the transcendent energy source of the universe, that is also the mysterious source of your own life, and everyone else's. In light of this, Campbell realized after years of being asked earnest questions about ultimate answers that, when people say they are looking for the meaning of life, what they're really looking for is a deep experience of it. A samathologist with a metaphysical slant in life, a doctor of things beyond appearances, he dedicated his life to mapping out the experience of plumbing those depths, which is the journey of the soul itself. The cartography, Asht Rewit, was the geography of the inner underworld, showing perilous territory to be traversed not by the faint, but by the stout of heart. If myths emerge. Introduction. Like dreams out of the psyche, he reasoned, they canals olidus backen. The way out is the way in. Itis a movement beyond the known boundaries of faith and convention, the search for what matters, the path of destiny, the route of individuality, the road of original experience, a paradigm for the forging of consciousness itself. In short, the hero's journey. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered in a decisive victory. I swan. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. This, monomyth, lies at the core of Campbell's steadfast belief in one universal mythology. Like the legendary griffin, the winged lion of the medieval bestiary, it was a composite, taking shape gradually, piece by piece, an innovative assemblage of kiddies from Campbell's own masters, Joyce, Mann, Young, Zimmer, Underhill, Kumaraswamy, and Ortega Gasset. Horodine, an influential passage that the will to be one selfless heroism. The monomythos in effect a metamyth, a philosophical reading of the unity of humankind's spiritual story, the story beyond the story. To paraphrase the ancient Japanese koan, it is the sound of my th clapping, the universal quest for self-transformation. The journey of the hero is about the courage to seek the depths, the image of creative rebirth, the eternal cycle of change within us. The uncanny discovery that the seeker is the mystery which the seeker seeks to know. The hero journey is a symbol that binds, in the original sense of the word, two distant ideas, the spiritual quest of the ancients with the modern search for identity, always the one, shape-shifting yet marvelously constant story that we find. B. Joseph Campbell's lifespan at Thayer's from Buffalo Bill to Star Wars, his work from Apollo the Greek god to Apollo spacecraft. His was truly a story with 1,000 faces. N. Stewart. Introduction. Brown's dream of documenting that Protean story was a vision journey in its own right. For years Campbell had shied away from film crews, deflecting the cult of celebrity by reminding people that, "It's not me, it's the myths," and the prying eyes of biography from audiences by insisting, "I've spent all my life trying to stay out of the way of this stuff." No doubt this colorful telling of Odysseus describing himself as Nomen to the Cyclops and Homer great epic was as much an element of his self-image as the Grail quest or the dream sequences from Finnegan's Wake. Outside of a few in-depth interviews, she instinctively lived out what the German poet Rainer Maria Rilke referred to when he wrote about the creative life. True art comes from the anonymous self. Nevertheless, there were choice passages here and there in our own filming of him over the 3-year period, in the scattered interviews found in library stacks, and during our casual conversations with him about how we had recognized, in meandering through the maze of his own life, the various stages of the hero journey. The calls to adventure, the mentors and allies, the threshold guardians, the dark forest, the bringing back of the Bunto the community. Once the group decision was made to approach Joe about supplementing the original eSalem material with personal interviews at this home in Honolulu, IWA selected to reassure him that now that we had the IDs in film, we were simply looking for the links between them. For the sake of the dramatic structure of the documentary, I told him, we thought our story would be even more compelling if we could chronicle the nature of his learning process. How did he discover the themes that became cross beams of his work? Why did he connect the Navajo material to the Hindu? When did he first align in his mind the twilight myths of the self with Joyce's Nightworld novels? Only after all the filming was completed, and we hunkered down in the editing room, did the theme of the hero journey become the Arianis for Thataldus through the labyrinth of film footage. Convoluted Asti conversations and interviews sometimes were, ranging from the Upanishads to Kant, the Gnostic Gospels to Black Elk. There was now the clue *, the winding thread *, Thescanofarianis for Thathisis to lead himself out of the labyrinth, the Origino 4-word clue. Introduction. Off Campbell's path through his own labyrinth, the relevance of the work to his own life, which made sense of his sometimes arcane, Connections. The moments of synchronicity, and then the whole world opened up, that highlighted his life confirmed his deep belief that devotion to one's own inner work is the beam that keeps you on the path. Over and over again, we discovered, he looked back through the years in the manner of Schopenhauer, who wrote about the well-lived life appearing in retrospect like a well-written novel. The first encounters with friends like Jiddu Krishnamurti, John Steinbeck, E.D. Ricketts, Alan Watts, and above all his wife, Jean Erdman, he would describe more like epiphanies or powerful chapters than anecdotes. And of the enormous influence he had on creative artists, he appeared profoundly grateful that Suchanapi Log could have been written to the story of his life's work. Foe. Stuart Bronzite Year Labor of Love, The Hero's Journey. The World of Joseph Campbell, premiered at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in February 1987. 7 months later, Joseph Campbell died quietly in his home in Honolulu at the age of 83. During the approximately 10 years between Braun's vision of popularizing Campbell at a time when few people wanted to hear about mythology, and the time our film was finally released, an astonishing turnaround had taken place. Campbell's fama had spread from a devoted audience of ex-students and avid readers to popular culture. Filmmakers like George Lucas and George Miller, sculptor Isamu Noguchi, rock stars David Byrne and the Grateful Dead, priests, poets, psychologists, and even comedians, were all publicly expressing their debt and admiration of him. The following summer, The Hero's Journey and Bill Moy Urza's interviews with Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth, were shown in PBS. The ensuing Campbell phenomenon took everyone by surprise. Who would have believed that the American pub lick would ever be interested in listening to a scholar and a journalist discuss religion for 6 hours? Nevertheless, Campbell cassette and book sales soared, discussion groups for med in schoolrooms, there. Introduction. Therapists' offices, church basements, Zen centers, and story conference rooms in Hollywood. The appeal went far beyond elitist debates about diffusion versus parallelism theories of anthropology, beyond the romanticizing of mythical Camelots and Troys. Instead, the country was mesmerized by a passionate storyteller, a robust athlete and musician turned dignified philosopher and writer, the exciting blend of Campbell's universal humanism and secular spirituality. Here was the background music of the spheres, a skeleton key to open the door to the worlds of art, literature, and religion. Most important, he was saying that, my th shaved do with how you live your life. And in or undermined be a pervasive feeling of deep skepticism and anxiety appeared someone who insisted that we find what electrifies and enlivens our hearts and wakes us. In fact, the public found in Joseph Campbell what the poet W.B. Yeats called, the old eagle's mind, the wise old man, the R.A. rest of archetypes annulment of eternal youth. Campbell's a message that myths matter galvanized a long dormant cultural discussion about the spiritual and aesthetic life. In the winter of 1986, at a memorable conference in San Francisco entitled, From Ritual to Rapture, starring Joseph Campbell, psychiatrist John Perry, and the Grateful Dead, Jerry Garcia burrowed the house down by confessing on stage to the old mythologist his feelings about the similarities between the ancient mystery festivals and rock concerts. They didn't know what they were saying, and we don't know what we're saying either, but we think we're saying the same thing. Not everyone understood myths overnight, but suddenly the old dream of a common language had been revived. Less than BC. After its debut in public television, I took the Hero's Journey around the country and to Europedo show in movie theaters, university auditoriums, and at film festivals. Audience everywhere stayed after the screenings for unusually long, probing question and answer sessions. When I began showing specially selected introduction, outtakes, passages from the hours and hours of film footage that never made the final cut of the film, Tomiown, Myth and Mauve, i.e.s, seminars, and continued to get delightful feedback, it became exhilarating likelier that we had a treasure trove of material left over. I approached Drive Brown about rescuing the hours of outtakes from the obscurity of film vaults and organizing them into a book to meet the ground's well of interest. He generously gave me access not only to the film footage but hours of videotaped lectures, and encouraged me to create a companion book to the film. For that I am deeply grateful. My interest in working with the original transcripts was also inspired by a driving curiosity to seek out in the hieroglyphics of nearly 1,500 pages of disjointed conversations, interviews, and speeches, the intriguing relationship between Camp Bell's personal journey and the evolution of his work. How did he reconcile his accumulation of such a staggering amount of knowledge, which include an unflinching look into the dark shadows of the human condition, with a life-affirming philosophy? A seeming paradox in the heart of the labyrinth reared its minotaur head. If the old gods are dead, and the traditional myths out of date, as Campbell insisted, why even study them, let alone rhapsodize about them? It can only be hoped that the following confluence of conversations, interviews, speeches, and book quotes evokes Camp Bell moving response. That we are in what the Greeks called the time of the metamorphoses of the gods. The images of the new gods, the new creative myths, the global vision, are being born not in new, out there, but in the mythogenic zone of the awakened human heart. There, for med for our different times, or ethi different metaphors to express the constant truths, and therein the courage can be found to join, with joyful participation in the soar rose of the world. This immortal teaching of affirmation and compassion, which Campbell found in the teachings of the Bud Dha, gave him the courage of his own convictions. This, I am convinced, Ishii's greatest legacy. Introduction. The actual transformation of the transcripts into book form follows my exploration through the records of the original filming at Esalen Institute, the National Arts Club, and finally at the Campbell home in Honolulu. I also had the great fortune of being able to select passages from the videotape lectures on The Perennial Philosophy, James Joyce and Thomas Mann, and Psyche and Symbol, from Joe Campbell Artificial Lecture Tour, which Dr. Brown, with tremendous foresight and courage, videotaped between 1982 and 1983. As well as the audio tape panel discussion after the West Coast premiere of The Hero's Journey at Directors Guild in Los Angeles in May 1987. Considerable editing was necessary to reconstruct the parallel journey of the work and the man. Where reconstructions were needed, as when there were the inevitable but exasperating gaps in the filming because the sound dropped away or conversations overlapped, I was able to resort to my own notes taken from Campbell seminars, workshops, and personal conversations. Trusting the Ledajo's personalicitis that highlighted the entire round of filming, the story slowly unfolded chapter by chapter as I thought for him. Other stories, other renditions, will follow this one, perhaps more comprehensive and less schematic. But the center views stand alone as the telling of the tale by the light of the fire. By the teller himself. Perhaps the self-synthesist had emerges was his last brilliant metaphor, a flickering image of the task that is before all of us today. One of the last times I saw Joe Campbell, in late spring of 1987, was in the Redwood Room of the Clift Hotel in San Francisco. That night, us had suften before in what we called our version of the philosophers. Long conversation. The one between minds long gone, still here, Andy Edicum. Wes spoke with great joy about two of our favorite topics, Joyce and Paris, and the bittersweet relationship between the artist and the city. A very final glass of Glenlivet I confided to him a favorite. Introduction. Story of my own. A few years before I was drifting across the country on a motorcycle trip when, like a wayward traveler in an Arabian Nights tale tripping over a Golnuggathan and a tree root in the dark forest, I discovered an uncanny scene that struck me as bang at the heart of the hero's journey. It was that of a crumbling tombstone in Boothville Cemetery. In Tombstone, Arizona, the grave marker of an old gunslinger. The epitaph read, "Be what you eat, 'cause if you what you ain't, then you ain't what you eat." I can hear Joe's hearty Bodhisattva now and the clink of hourglasses over the soothing sounds of the late-night jazz piano in the old Redwood Paneled Bar. "That's it," he cried out with that eternal look of wonder in his eyes. "That's what it's all about, the mystery of the journey. That, just marvelous. Now, how did that go again? Be what you eat." Single quote. Phil Cusino. Editors. Acknowledgements. I would like to express my deepest gratitude to all those who helped me with the development of this book. IOWEA special thanks to Robert Cockrell, who first introduced me to Joseph Campbell, and eternal thanks to Stuart Brown for his unstinting support for my work on his documentary, The Hero's Journey, Andy Senkor aging me to fulfill his vision of a companion book to the film. My heartfelt thanks to Jean Erdman Campbell for her graceful comments on the first draft of the manuscript, her hospitality in Honolulu when she gave me kind access to the Campbell family photographs, and for her faith in me, all of which strengthened the courage of my convictions. I wish to thank my editor Tom Grady, Hausen Waverengen his enthusiasm about this project, despite its many permutations, and as sage with his advice. Many thanks to Kevin Bentley, Aria Ertz, and all those involved at Harper & Row, San Francisco, whose patience and guidance saw this book through to its publication. I also want to thank Detta Penna for her elegant design. Vigorous thanks also to Amirt researcher Linadal Pog, Ghetto. Her devotion will be remembered and appreciated by all. Editor's acknowledgement. Those who wish to follow the footsteps of scholarship in this book. I am very grateful to the other voices in the book, those whose questions and insights brought a fresh perspective to this rich mate. Rial, and to the various photographers, artists, and writers whose contributions enriched this book immeasurably. My thanks also to my friend Tom Schlesinger, with whom I first ventured onto the road of teaching and writing about the hero's journey, and T.O. another close friend, Keith Thompson, whose robust conversations with me about mythology and whose key suggestions for the manuscript have made this a better book. To Robin Eschner I want to convey my everlasting thanks for her gifts of love, wit, and inspiration that helped me complete the journey. I would also like to gratefully acknowledge the contributions of Mythology Ltd., a California Limited partnership whose foresight in raising funds made possible the acquisition of this material. Finally, I would like to dedicate this entire endeavor to Joseph Campbell, whose work changed so many of our lives by simply giving us the key to the realm of the muses. Phil Cusino. P9. Chronology of Joseph Campbell's life. 1904. 1910. 1913 to 17. 1917. 1919. 1919 to 21. Born in New York City on March 26, the son of Charles W. Campbell, a merchant from Waltham, Massachusetts, and Josephine E. Lynchoff, New York. His father takes young Joe and his brother, Charlie, to see Buffalo Bills Wild West show at Madison Square Garden and to the Museum of Natural History. His lifelong interest in Indians begins. Family moves to New Rochelle, New York, and his fascination with Indians and myths intensifies. At age 11, he is admitted to the adult stacks in the New Rochelle Public Library to continue his studies. Family builds bungalow in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. There he meets his first mentor, Elmer Gregor, noted author of boys' books on American Indians. Tragic fire destroys the family home in New Rochelle, killing his grandmother and destroying his collection of Indian books and relics. Enrolls at Canterbury Prep School, New Milford, Connecticut. Headmaster Dr. Nelson Hume introduced Shim to literature and the art of writing. His favorite subject is biology. Editor of School Literary Magazine, Ritter and business manager for school's weekly paper, plays F less than OT. Ballinfield hockey. Graduates with Head Boy Award. Chronology of Joseph Campbell's life. 1921. Enters Dartmouth College to study biology and mathematics and play freshman football. 1922. Discovers the humanities after writing Mirakowski's Theramansa of Leonardo da Vinci. Transfers to Columbia University. 1922-27. Studies under his third mentor, Raymond Weaver. Member off-track team, 1924-26, sets Columbia half-mile record. Runs in Penn Relay Championships and for New York Athletic Club track teams. Also plays saxophone in jazz bands for college and fraternity dances. 1924. Meets Jiddu Krishna immersion boat trip to Europe and becomes Sinter Ested, Innovagwe, in Hinduism and Buddhism. 1925. Earns BA degree from Columbia University. Runs with New York Athletic Club track team in the AAU Championships in San Francisco. On a trip to Hawaii he befriends the father of surfing, Duke Kahanamoku. Upon return he attends the Indian Rodeo in Yakima, Washington. 1926. Returns to Columbia in order to run with the track team, studies media. Aval literature. Completes Thejason, The Dolorous Stroke, from the Arthurian Legends. 1927-28. Receives Proudfoot Traveling Fellowship for 2 years of study in Europe. Earns M.A. from Columbia University. Studies Romance Philology, Old French, and Provençal at the University of Paris under Joseph Badir, noted translator of Tristan and Isolde. Discovers modern art and modern literature, notably Joyce's Ulysses. Acquaintanceship with sculptor Antoine Bourdelais, owner of Shakespearea Indie Company, Sylvia Beach. 1928-29. Transfers to University of Munich to study Sanskrit and Indo-European philology. Discovers the works of Freud and Jung, Thomas Mann, and Goethe. He returns to the United States 2 weeks before the crash. Drops work on his PhD to retire to the woods of Woodstock with his sister, Alice, a student of sculptor Archipenko, renting a cabin for $20 a year. There he pursues the line of study he began in Paris. 1929-31. After futile attempts to write short stories, absolutely nothing that I wrote would sell, turns to voluminous readings in modern American literature and philosophy. Hemingway, Lewis, Dewey, and Russell. 1931-32. Drives Sal across the country in his mother model to think how this future. Stops in San Jose, California, to see old friend nutrition Estadelle Davis. She introduces him to John and Carol Steinbeck, and their neighbor, intertidal biologist Ed Ricketts. Campbell Stacenina, $15 a month cottage. Discovers Spengler in the Carmel Library, the major crisis of my intellectual life. Writes 85 colleges and universities for a job. Travels up coast of British Columbia to Alaska with Ricketts, collecting intertidal fauna. Andre confirms his belief of the relationship. Chronology of Joseph Campbell's life. Between mythology and biology. Accepts age of offer from old headmaster at Canterbury. 1933. Teaches history, English, French, German, while studying Spengler. Mann, Jung, Joyce. Resigns at and Iran goes back, on the Depression. Sells first story, Strictly Platonic, for $300, and on that plus some savings from his jazz playing days returns to Woodstock to read and write. 1933-34. Reads through the winter. Joyce, Spengler, Frobenius, Mann, Freud. Jung. Starts a novel that doesn't work. Invited to teach at Sarah Lawrence College on the recommendation of his old master, Professor W. Lawrence. Jaime Diatelli accepts. 1938. Marries Jean Erdman, his former student from Sarah Lawrence and a member of the Martha Graham Dance Company. 1940. Meets Indologist Heinrich Zimmer, who introduced Shim to the founders of the Bollingen series. 1941. Works with Swami Nikhilananda on the translation and editing of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna and the Upanishads for the next 3 years. 1942. Recommended by his mentor, Zimmer, to the Bollingen Foundation to produce premiere volume in their series. The next year, Zimmer dies of pneumonia. Zimmer Swidawas Campbelltoted Zimmer Spastu Most writings, to which he devotes 12 years. 1943. Campbell's first publication, Commentary to Where the Two Comito. Their Father, a Navajo War Ceremonial. With Jeff King and Maud Oakes. 1944. Publishes A Skeleton Key to Finnegan's Wake with Henry Morton Robin. Son. Writes Commentary of Complete Grimm's Fairy Tales. Joins editorial staff of the Dance Observer. Begins work on The Hare with a Thousand Faces. 1946. Publishes Smith's San Symbols in Indian Art and Civilization. 1948. Publishes The King and the Corpse. Article on Finnegan Wake, a Pearson James Joyce, 2 Decades of Criticism. 1949. After 2 other publishers reject the manuscript, Bollingen accepts The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Award from American Academy of Arts and Letters for The Hero with a Thousand Faces. 1951. Publishes Philosophies of India, Bios and Mythos, Prologue Monado, A Science of Mythology, an article in Psychoanalysis and Cole. Touré. Essays in honor of Gaza Roheim. General editor of the series Myth and Man, and the volume by Carl Kearney, The Gods of the Greeks. 1952. Publishes The Portable Arabian Nights. 1953. Appointed president of the Creative Film Foundation and editor of the Chronology of Joseph Campbell's Life. Papers from the Eranos Yearbooks. Publishes Spirit and Nature. General editor of Meader and Divine Horseman. The Living Gods of Haiti, The Myth and Man series. 1954. General editor of Watts's Mythandrichuel and Christianity, The Myth and Man series. On sabbatical leave he travels in India, Ceylon, Thailand, Burma, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Japan. Begins study of Japanese. 1955. Publishes Heart of Indian Asia. Publishes, as editor, The Mysteries. 1956. Lecturer at Foreign Service Institute, Department of State, Washington, D.C. 1957. Publishes, as editor, Man and Time. Reads first paper at the Eranos Conference in Ascona, Switzerland, The Symbol Without Meaning. 1958. Reads paper, Oriental Philosophy and Occidental Psychoanalysis at IXT International Congress for the History of Religions, Tokyo and Kyoto, Maruzen, Tokyo. 1959. Reads first paper at Eranos Foundation, Renewal Myths and Rites of the Primitive Hunters and Planters. Publishes The Masks of God, Volume I, Primitive Mythology. 1960. Publishes, as editor, Spiritual Disciplines. 1961. Publishes The Masks of God, Volume 2, Oriental Mythology. Appointed to trusteeship in the Bollingen Foundation. Listed in Hosuan, America. 1964. Publishes, as editor, Man and Transformation and the Masks of God, Volume Occidental Mythology. 1967. Named to the Board of Directors of the Society for the Arts, Religion, and Contemporary Culture. 1968. Publishes, as editor, The Mystic Vision and the Masks of God, Volume IV, Creative Mythology. Begins long association with Michael Murphy and Esalen Institute. 1969. Publishes The Flight of the Wild Gander, Explorations in the Mythological Dimension. 1970. Publishes, as editor, Myths, Dreams, and Religion. 1972. Publishes Myths to Live By and edits The Portable Young. Retires from Sarah Lawrence College after 38 years. Named president of the Society for the Study of Religion. Travels to Iceland and Turkey. Interview with Sam Keenan, Psychology Today. With his wife, Jean Erdman, founds the Theater of the Open Eye in New York City. Chronology of Joseph Campbell's Life. 1973. Receives the Hofstra Distinguished Scholar Award. Publishes Erotic Irony and Mythic Forms in the Art of Thomas Mann, a broadside by Sarah Lawrence College. 1974. Publishes The Mythic Image. 1976. Receives the Melcher Award for contributions to religious liberalism. Travels to Egypt and Greece. 1977. Edits My Life and Lives. The Story of a Tibetan Incarnation by Rado Kyonglan and Wang Lazong. Interview with Donald Newlove in Esquire. 1978. Receives honorary Ph.D. from Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. 1983. Publishes the Historical Atlas of Mythology, Volume I, The Way of the Ani-Mal Powers. Befriended by filmmaker George Lucas, who invites him and Jean to Skywalker Ranch in Northern California to see the Star Wars trilogy, which was greatly influenced by his work. 1984. 80th birthday celebration at the Palace of Fine Arts, San Francisco. Attended by 1,000 people, with Sam Keen, Chunggong Aluong, Stan Lei Kellerman, Barbara Meyerhoff, Maria Gimbutas, and Robert Bly. Entitled, A Symposium on the Hero's Journey, 1985. Awarded the Medal of Honor for Literature by the National Arts Club of New York for The Way of the Animal Powers. 1986. Publishes The Inner Reaches of Outer Space, Mythos Metaphor and Religion. Participates in seminar for UC Berkeley Extension entitled, From Ritual to Rapture, with psychiatrist John Perry and the legendary rock band, The Grateful Dead. 1987. Premiere of The Hero's Journey, The World of Joseph Campbell, at the New Directors, New Films Festival at the Museum of Modern Art, New York. The PBS series, The Power of Myth, with journalist Bill Moy. Ursares. Dias in Honolulu, Hawaii, October 30, 1988. Posthumous publication of The Power of Myth and the Historical Atlas of World Mythology. Volume 2, The Way of the Seated Earth. Joseph Camp. Bell Chair of Comparative Mythology established at Sarah Lawrence College. The Hero's Journey. The Kalto Adventure. Signifies that destiny. Hasam Mon the hero and transfer red. His spiritual center of gravity from within. The pale of his society. Tozone unknown. This fateful region of both treasure and danger may be variously represented. Asadi's Tantland, a forest, a kingdom underground, beneath the waves or above the sky, a secret island, lofty mountain top, or profound dream state. Buddha as always a place of strangely fluid and polymorphous beings, unimaginable, torments, superhuman deeds, and impossible delights. Joseph Campbell, the hare with a thousand faces. VP1Q greater than. The Kalto Adventure. Joseph Campbell was born in New York City on March 26, 1904, the son of Charles and Josephine Campbell. His passion for mythology began when he was a young boy and his father took him on his younger brother, Charlie, to Buffalo Bill's Wild West show at Madison Square Garden, and to the Museum of Natural History, where he became fascinated with Indian totem poles. By the time he was 12, Hugh as voraciously reading books about American Indians. He soon recognized the parallels between these stories and those of his own Roman Catholic tradition, a discovery that would fire a cross-cultural study in the arcane discipline of mythology for the rest of his life. A student at prep school in New Milford, Connecticut, his favorite studies were biology and math. Hugh and Tonto attend Dartmouth in 1921 for 1 year, but felt a complete disorientation there and even considered dropping out of college to enter business. In the summer of 1922, a family friend gave him a biography of Leonardo da Vinci that so inspired him he transferred to Columbia University to shift my interest from science to cultural history and the humanities. Campbell poses with a young Yakima woman at the Yakima Rodeo in Yakima, Washington, 1925. Fort. STUARTBROWN. Can you tell us about your grandparents *** and your Irish background? Carrot Joseph Campbell. I didn't really know my grandparents well. My father's father came over at the end of the potato famine in Ireland. He was a peasant on the Beckamy Garden estate in Waltham, Massachusetts. My father grew up there. Andy's mother, also, was from Ireland. As a boy, Dad go to job in a department store and became one of their major salesmen, and then they sent them to New York to open the New York office. So I was born in New York. I remember when I was a little boy visiting my grandfather. He had a great white bear dasa grandfatherado. That's about all I remember. That was a long way back. And my mother's father he met only once. Mother was a New York girl but Joseph Campbell, a GE 13 weeks, with his parents, Charles W. and Josephine Campbell, 1904. The Call to Adventure. Her mother was from Scotland and was a pretty, lovely, wonderful woman, and she took very good care of us. My mother had a beautiful brother who was a glorious swimmer. Headed of diabetes when he was around 22. I can remember swimming with him when I was socket. He was the only other person in the family that played Arale at all in the building of my ideals and idealism. I never thought very much about being thoroughly Celtic Irish until well on in my college years, when I began to get a real sense of what the Celtic consciousness was and what a good fortune it was to come out of that realm of wonderful, rich verbal fantasy. The whole fairyland world of your piece out of Ireland, really. And then in my graduate years I became interested in the Arthurian material, which is thoroughly Celtic, and gradually I got a sense of my relationship to their mentality. Brown. What were your boyhood years like? Were you an avid student? Campbell. From really, around 4 or 5 years old. I was fascinated by American Indians, and that became my real studying. I went to school and had no problems with my studies, but my own enthusiasm was in this maverick realm of the American Indian mythologies. Well lived in New Rochelle, New York, in those years, right next door to the public library. When I, Campbell, right, at around age 4 with his younger brother Charlie, about 1908. In latter years Campbell reveled in the family lore. Hindus brother were on strolling with their grandmother and baby sister down Riverside Drive in New York City when a woman stopped them. You seem like it whoa nice little boys, the woman said. Joe boldly responded, I have Indian blood in me. Then his brother piped in, and I have dog blood. The Hero's Journey was about 11. I had read all the books about Indians in the children's library and was actually admitted to the stacks. I remember coming home from the library with stacks of books. And I Think that's where me life as a scholar began. I know it did. There they all were. All the reports of the Bureau of Ethnology, Frank H. Cushingen, Franz Boas, and a lot of them. By the time I was 13 I knew about as much about the Amer. I can Indian as a good many anthropologists that I have met since. They know sociological interpretations of why the Indians are the way they are or were, but hadn't know much about Indians. And, did know. Foe. Brown. Did you have any heroes in your youth? Any lionized characters who became a nearly mentor for you? Campbell. Well, my parents found a lovely place in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania long about 1917, and right nearby was a man whose books about Indians I had been reading. And so he became my first guru, or teacher. His name was Elmer Gregor and he wrote books about American Indians. He had been out in the Indian country. In those days, thesis 1912, 13, 14, 15, the Indian Wars were still going on, and the only good Indian. JG:C:'T, P, VV:. Single quote. JFV. Asterisk. The Campbell family bungalow in Pike County, Pennsylvania, about 19 volts. The call to adventure. Was a dead Indian, and all of that. So there were Indians in the wind, Evanthawa were in the east. And so this beautiful place became a real discovery of nature. My emphasis on biology and nature and the body in my writing about my th comes out of those years. It is really a combination that comes from this man, who was a natural East as well as an Indian scholar. Help him right on the road. Elmer Gregor. I remember him as a great. We used to communicate across the dining room with Indian Sign Language and all that kind of thing. Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. Above, about 1910. This photo was taken by Campbell's father in one of the family excursions to see Buffalo Bill Cody and his spectacular troop of cavalrymen, sharpshooters, and Indian warriors. The show ignited the young Campbell's lifelong fascination with American Indians. Buffalo Bill Cody, right, frontier scout, hero of dime novels, and a more foreseen the mythologizing of the American West. Enjoy Sachigaran newspaper instant after a performance. Courtesy of the Buffalo Bill Historical Society, Cody, Wyoming. My career as a mythologist began almost immediately with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show at Madison Square Garden, 1910. He came Fort War 3 years. The N headed in the group that replaced him was called the 101 Ranch. One of the Indians in the sideshow was Irontail, whose head had just appeared on the Indian head nickel. He'd sit and profile at the people who filed by as they took their nickels out of their pockets, looked, bowed their heads, and went in. Joseph Campbell, Esquire, September 1977. The Hero's Journey. Brown. It sounds as if your interest in Indians really was rising as much out of yourself as from any direct encouragement from your family. Campbell. My parents were very cooperative, but I found it myself. They helped me with it, but they were business people, they had no scholarship. But he met people who could help them find the books that I could use, and so, really, I had wonderful help there. Meanwhile in school I was doing the things one has to do, studying what was given me to study, and he enjoyed it all. But the real stuff was off on this side. Indeed, the first and most essential service of a mythology is this one of opening the mind and heart to the utter wonder o' fall. Being. Joseph Campbell, The Inner Reaches of Outer Space. Brown. I've never heard I speak much about your own background in Roman Catholicism, the church and its rituals. Campbell. I was in a day school convent in New York with the nuns until, oh, my lord, I was about 15. And when you're born in an Irish Catholic family and environment and spend your boyhood with nuns, and you're observing mass, I was a little altar boy. You're studying the Catholic doctrine all the time with deep belief. And I think anyone who has not been a Catholic in that sort of substantial way has no realization of the ambience of religion within which you live. It's powerful, it's potent, it's life supporting, and it's beautiful. The Catholic religion is a poetic religion. Every month has its poetic and spiritual value. Boy, that got into me. I'm sure that my interest in mythology comes out of that. I notice when I read the work of scholars or artists or novelists who are really interested in myth as a life structuring thing. Not something that's just fantasy, bootyper, significant fantasy, 9 times out often they were Catholics. I've been interested in what happens to people when they leave their religions. Protestants and Jews become psychologists and sociologists, and Catholics become poets. You know, it's really true. Brown. Did you go to a parochial school or a public grade school? The Call to Adventure. Campbell. I went to Canterbury School, a fine Catholic prep school, in Connecticut, 1919 to 1921. That's where another beginning took place. There were 2 particular teachers there. One was the headmaster who founded school, Nelson Hume, and it was from him that I learned to write. He was a marvelous, marvelous teacher. I was in A class. Oh, this was real elegant. The school was newly founded, so there were only about 50 boys in the school. There were 6 of us in my class, and we had a kind of precise attention. Every day we had to write a daily scene. Hume would come in and read out scenes and criticize and adjust them for us right there. It was every day, writing, writing, writing. And he was studying biology at that time and mathematics. Those were my principal school interests. Of course we had Totoka languages, and back in those years after World War I we still weren't allowed to study German, we had to study Spanish and French. I couldn't even have a German measles. I had Liberty measles. But the Manhauser teacher in the languages was a magnificent scholar, and it was through him that I first learned that there was Sushadinge Sanskrit. He was a linguist. Between I am and the headmaster I discovered the world of, what can we say, academic scholarship, although I had a scov. Read my subject myself with the Indians. Brown. Is there any truth to the story that you actually taught your own high school class in biology? Campbell. Yes. The headmaster, Hume, W.A. Shopping that I would become a master in his school. He gave me opportunities to give lectures to the boys. No one else had ever had this given him. Booty had that privilege. I gave a lecture once on the history of the American Indians, and another on biology and the circulation system of the blood. Thosirith the Great achievements, my first lectures. Foe, P9. Campbell. One of the big problems in mythology is this. One of putting the individual in accord with nature. The world in which the primitive people are living becomes mythologized. One of the problems in our tradition is that the land, the Holy Land. Campbell, Wright, and friend, John McPhee, at Canterbury School, J 920. When you are in accord with nature, nature will yield up its bounty. And every sacred place is the place where eternity shines through time. Joseph Campbell. The Hero's Journey. Black Elk. Only a preacher to the white men near the Pine Ridge Reservation where he spent this last years. Huda Wichashuakon, a holy Manor shaman, Tohi's own people, the Oglala Sioux. Campbell strongly felt that his story, a told to John Neihardt in Black Elk speaks, I Sparto Jor. Spiritual history is somewhere else. So I've lost the whole sense of accord with nature. And if it's no there, it's nowhere. Angelesarrien. American Indian mythology really brings out that reverence for nature. Campbell. I like that passage very much in the Black Elk speech in John Neihart's book. Black Elk speaks, whereas tell ing about his vision. He says, the found himself on the central mountain of the world. And the central mountain of the world was Harney Peak in South Dakota. But anywhere, he says, is the center of the world. And thesis the basic mythological problem, moving to a landscape. Find the sanctity of that land. And then there can be the matching of your own nature with this gorgeous nature of the land. It is the first essential adaptation. No if, as in our tradition. You think of nature as corrupt, that there are certain things in nature that should not be, then you can't put yourself in accord with nature. Instead you're always thinking of right and wrong, evil and good, the devil and God. And so you are in an ethical position indeed. Makes yielding to nature so difficult. Arrien. And yet we have the four seasons, which are a constant mirror of our own process. Each and F is Hasa spring. We have a summer, we have a winter time. Campbell. The poets and the artists shave recognize this, in general. They have put themselves in accord with it in order to find their own inner base. EDWARDDREESSEN. You're saying that thought might is a constant regeneration, an identification with the life process? Campbell. That's what Titus. The amazing thing is that when you go to a sacred place you feel its sanctity. There's a little bit of it down here in this little stream, at East Salem in Big Sur, California, which the Salem Indians regarded as sacred. The landscape here was involved in their mythologies and rituals. I remember when I was in Iceland there was an Icelandic mythographer who took my wife and me around and showed us all the sacred places. There was one place, Thingvellir, which was where they had their annual great ceremony. You felt that this is a magical place, thesis a magical place. Andy had the same thing happen when I was in the great caves of Lascaux in France. Those places you don't want to leave, they grab something inside you. They's very deep and very important. I'll never forget the experience of Gunadelphia in Greece, the call to adventure. Campbell with Icelandic mythographer Einar Pedielson on the sacred grounds of Thingvellir, Iceland, 1972. The temple shave all been deliberately smashed by the vandalism of the Christians, but they're still there and you can see what the Greek idea of corporal beauty was. That is where the oracle, the prophetess, received inspiration in the fumes, the smoke coming up from the abyss, and she prophesied and gave statements of destiny. And then you have on another level this beautiful theater with the wonderful valley and landscape as its backdrop and that accord with nature, the bringing of nature to its high fulfillment in human nature. This is Greek. Onahite more as you climband you come to the stadium, the athletic field. Thesis the only culture I know where this whole range of the spiritual, the religious, the aesthetic, and the physical is all put together into one picture. Any young man in Greece could participate in those games. Thesis the idea of the individual and the individual's quest. Any beautiful lands like these are power spots because they help you put your own nature in accord. And artists supposed to do this also. Cezanne says somewhere, art is a harmony parallel to nature. Arrien. That's beautiful. The Hero's Journey. Campbell. Well, The basic idea in the old Bronze Age mythologies was of the cycle of the ages, the cycle of the year, and the cycle of a lifetime, all as equivalent cycles. Just think of it. Cycles, cycles, cycles. Nothing occurs that has not already occurred. There is a nothing to it but real to it. Arien. Like the Tao Te Ching is a whole mythic motif honoring nature, a mirror of oneself. Campbell. Yes, yes. And this comes out very radically in the line between Persia and India. Zoroaster, the Persian prophet, actually attacks the Indian idea of yoga, which involves putting yourself in accord with the universe. You see? Thesis: two totally different mythologies, and a Makisha big difference. The scientist can't tell us, and doesn't eventually do tell us, whether it's a good world or a bad world. That's not his job. But headitude of their mythology does establish Europe's relationship to nature. Now this thing is coming in, with people in this country, at an irate, of the rediscovery of nature. And through it the Yar rediscovering the American Indian stuff. I knew about it when I was socket. I used to read the stuff when nobody else ever thought about it. Know it's all over the place with wonderful characters such as the medicine man Black Elk, Asan Black Elk speaks, Wichisa. Work that was Givandas by a writer, John Neihardt, and not by an anthropologist, Thaw got the inner message. It's something that's making a story in this country right now, spiritual history. Black Elk speaks. It marvelous. When you look at that nature world it becomes Anacon, it becomes a holy picture that speaks of the origins of the world. Almost every mythology that knows anything about water sees the origins of life coming out of water. And curiously, that's true. It's amusing that the origin of life out of water is in myths, and then again, finally, in science, we find the same thing. It's exactly so. I can remember when I spent a long time with an intertidal biologist, E.D. Ricketts, in that area between low tide and high tide, 1931-1932. All those strange forms, cormorants and little worms of different kinds sandal. You'd hear, my gosh, this generation of life was a great battle going on, life consuming life, everything learning how to eat the other one, the whole mystery, and then from the wreathy crawl upon the land. And also in the mythic themes Jenner ally out of the ocean, Orwidden India is called the Milky Ocean out of which the whole universe comes. Key. The call to adventure. Dreesen. The milky elixir of life. Campbell. Yes, the milky elixir of life. Arien. There is the water on there is this great rock, so here are mythic motifs. Campbell. Well, yes, and the tree in the rock aerial SO motifs. The Syroxarethindering, and the tree the living sim. Bull. James Joyce plays with it in Finnegan's Wake, where he speaks about the treestone, Tristan, the one who is wealthy, theater Nalrock, ever-growing life. Dreesen. When you pick up rocks off a beach that seem to have something to do with you, you feel a connection. Campbell. Any child walking along the beach naturally picks up buried treasures, stones and shells, and things like that. And the use of the shell, the conch, Asatrumpathastido with the voice of the ocean and the summons to the people. Arrien. Like the sirens. Campbell. And actually, psychologically, the ocean is the counterpart of the unconscious into which the sun of consciousness sets and out of which it comes. Minaret of the Mosquite Samurai in Iraq. Ascending mountains is a common metaphor for a spiritual quest and ascent. Arrien. When looking at the mountains here I was thinking Ingabutrinidam Albuk Mount Analog and about the mountain being a symbol of the inner quest. Campbell. When the clouds come down at Sistha, the heavenly powers were descending on the realm of the earth. And in the early mythologies, for instance, Ofangshan Sumer, the early street emergence out of the sea of life is in the form of a mountain. The mountain is Samaline female. The upper half is male and the lower half male. Then it separates and the upper half becomes the sky and the goddess is the mountain. And then the descent of the clouds is the joining of heaven and earth, which is to say the joining of the phenomenological side of life, the living, in the world with its spiritual import and the juncture of the two. Thesis: why ascending the mountains is a standard theme for a spiritual quest and ascent. Moses goes to the top of the mount. The hero's journey. Toin and the God delivers the law to him. There are just no end of mountain themes. Although Jesus across is not on a mountain, there was a little rise of hill there, and the mountain theme is insisted upon in the art representations of the cross. Dreesen. Odysseus came out of the water and Camionto Theland came to the mountain. How can you describe that in mythological terms? Campbell. In the Greek world the emergence of a being out of the water is a constant theme, the boy riding the dolphin who establishes Delphi, for example. It is the emergence of life out of the sea into the world of solid circumstances. Then the end of the world, the end of his cycle of time, ends in water. That's the flood motif, which appears in all mythologies, all the cyclic mythologies, of the end of time. No, you have that theme of being born in perfection, then gradually a sort of entropy increases, losing tension. Life depends on tension, and as soon as the polarities begin to dissolve we move into an androgynous situation of male-female barbershops. Then everything has gone back into the anthropological soup, and it's time for the world to come again. So the cycle comes out of the sea, which is a mixture of everything, and becomes defined in the forms of the landscape and life and gradually returns to the sea. Thesis. The cycle of it all. The ages of gold, silver, bronze, iron, the abyss, the end start again. ARRIEN. Sophie Hero's journey is very much equated with the mountain quest? Campbell. Yes indeed. And one part of the mythological motif of the hero's journey is acquiescence. For instance, I am moving toward death, a sweeler. That's also yielding, and the heroist the one who knows when to surrender and what to surrender to. The main theme is to yield your position to the dynamic. And the dynamic of life is now this for meats that form. Yield. That's what goes on in the world of fish. It's what the Hindu Skalmatsinaya, the law of the fish, which is that the big ones eat the little ones, and the little ones shave to be smart so they can grow up. ARRIEN. The alchemist said that we're life weavers of all the elements, earth, fire, water, and air. And when we say somebody's in their element or out of their element, what is it? Really that they're saying? 12. The call to adventure. Campbell. Yes, well, the element of where you are is always involved in the ritual of orientation of the four quarters as with the Indians in the ceremony of the calumet, the sacred pipe. The pipe is a kind of portable altar, and when it's lighted, it is not being smoked for fun, typically, but as a sacred act. When it is lighted the incenses, as it were, going to heaven. The pipe stem is lifted so that the sun smokes first, then it's addressed to the four quarters so you know where you are, the central mountainous. Right here, which is everywhere. And the celebrant smokes and then the pipe is passed around. This orientation of the quarters, I guess one could say, is the basic high cultural myth form, the center. The quarters. And then wherever you go, find a center. That establishes the sacred point, where the high point is, and then you have the four quarters. Well, I've bicycling, which is what you do even when you are eating grapes. You're still killing something. Life just lives in life. And it's the one life in all of these different heads of mouths eating itself. It's a fantastic mystery. That's what's symbolized in the snake biting its own tail, the snake of life consuming itself. That's what it means. The essence of life is that it lives by killing and eating. And that's the great meister of that myth Shavito deal with. The primitive people that live by killing have to reconcile the psyche to this thing because for them the animals are manifestations of divine powers. Not only that, they're wearing the skins of the animals, their tents are made out of the animal skins, and so they're living on death all the time in a sea of blood. And a typical myth is a kind of covenant between the animal and the human world, where it is understood that this is the way of nature and that the animals become their willing victims. They give themselves willingly with the understanding that the ritual of gratitude will be enacted to return their life to the source of life, so that another group of animals of the same kind can come to be consumed next year. For them the animals are manifestations of divine powers. Would you like to hear a little bit of a myth on this theme? This story is of a time when a certain tribe was facing a desperate winter. The Indians shot away to kill a whole herd of, and the whole secret OJ relaying mythology and the spiritual life to your environment is involved in what's called land namabi. The people in Iceland, naming and claiming the land through ing the landscape, land taking. You're at the land you are living in as the Holy Land. Pipe. Decep Campbell. Ed. Note. In his latter career Campbell vigorously took on a more contemporary phrasing throughout this historical atlas of mythology, and in his last lectures, Campbell referred to Hamakahai water susha the term, primal, cultures. 13. The hero's journey. Buffalo, which gave the tribe its meat for the winter, by stampeding them over a great precipice. So the animals go verandernach topices at the bottom and then they can be killed. But his particular year when they had stampeded the buffalo and the buffalo would get to the edge, they would W or V side, nobody was going over. So it looked bad for the tribe. On a morning a young woman gets to go get the water for her family. From the DB she sees the buffalo just up there, right on the edge, and she says, "Oh, if you'd only come over and give food to my people for the winter, I would marry one of you." And immediately they began coming over. Well, that was a surprise. A still larger surprise was that one of them comes up and says, "All right, girlie, we're off." "Oh, no," she says. "Oh, yes," he says. "Look, it's happened, and you have given your promise and we've done the work." So he to catch her by the arm. It's hard to know how a buffalo can take you by the arm Buthitos, on to lead her off over the hill and out onto the plains. When her family wakes up the next morning they look around and ask, "Where's a Minnehaha, anyhow?" Then daddy goes out, and being an Indian he no show. Tariadin footprints what's going in. Helixanzis, she's run off with a buffalo. Heputs in his walking moccasin sanda to catch his bow and arrow and goes off to find his daughter among the buffalo. After his follow this footsteps and in a considerable way, he comes to a wallow where the buffalo like to roll around to get the lice off. Hesits down and thinks, what am I going to do? Then he sees a beautiful magpie. Now in the hunting mythologies there are certain animals that are every clever. Magpies and foxes and blue jays and ravens. The Sirazord of Shamanani Malls. Saw the magpie comes down and Bayan's picking around, and the father says, "Beautiful bird, my daughter has run off with a buffalo. Have you seen a young woman with the buffalo people?" The magpie says, "Yes, there's a young woman with buffalo over there right now." So the father says, "Oh, Will you go tell her how their father is here? The magpie flies over and there shies. I don't know what. 14. The call to adventure. She's doing knitting or something like that, and behind her all the buffalo are having a nap. Right behind Harry's the great big fellow. The bear comes picking over Enzi's, your father's the wallow. Oh, dear, she says. Thesis dangerous. Thesis terrible. Tell him to wait. I'll see about this. Presently the buffalo wakes up, the big fellow behind her, and takes a phone of his horns and says, go get me some water. She takas the horn and goes to the wallow on Thera's daddy. Daddy grabs her and he says, you come. No, 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 this is very dangerous. Let me fix this thing up. So she gets the water and goes back to the buffalo. Head takes it and sniffs and says, fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Indian. And she says, oh, no. And he says, yes, Onderoors, and all the buffalo get up and they lift their tails and start to dance and roar and go to the wallow and trample daddy into invisibility. He's just not there anymore, she has just wiped him out. The girl begins to cry and the old buffalo says, so you're crying, what's the matter? It's me daddy. He says, yeah, you've lost your daddy, but we lose our wives and our uncles, our children, and everything, to feed your people. Well, she says, but daddy. There's a kind of sympathy in the buffalo for Rhonda. Says, well, if you can bring your daddy back to life, I'll let you go. So she calls the magpie and says, will you peck around a little and see if you can find a piece of daddy? And he does. He pecks around and finds a little vertebrae, a bit of backbone. Ivy got something here, he says. Well, she says, that'll do. So she puts it down on the ground and takes Cherobe and puts it over the piece of bone and starts to chant. She chants a magical power song. And presently you can see there's a man under the buffalo robe. She looks under, and yes, Ivy's daddy alright. But then needs a little more singing. And she goes on with her chant and presently he stands up. The buffalo are tremendously excited about this. And they say, well, now, why don't you do this for us? Why don't you bring us? 15. The hero's journey. Back to life after you've killed Usul. No, we'll give you our buffalo dance, we'll tell you how to do it. And when you've slaughtered Pterodalato for people, you dance this dance and sing your song and will come over here to feed your people. Thesis: The Origin Legend of the Blackfoot Buffalo Society. It was published in a book I read when I was socked by George Bird. Grinkai, a really marvelous writer and collector of Indian material. It's called Blackfoot Lodge Tales. Now you turn from one people to another and you get one story after another like this, of a covenant between the people and the animals, all understood to be part of the nature of the world. This life eating life. And of course, when they ate, they didn't thank the Iridia of God for having given them the animal. They thanked the animal, which is Era the Rap Propriate Act. The great ceremonies of the Northwest cult people, for instance, are ceremonies thanking the salmon of the first salmon catch for having come again this year. It's a beautiful idiot that life is on the surface unendurable. It's a fierce, ferocious thing. Schopenhauer said in one of his best moments, life is something that should not have been. If it's not something that should not have been, but something that should have been, then you've got that's all, the way it is. And when Nietzsche comes along and reads Schopenhauer, he takes the other attitude toward this idea of life eating life, and he says, yes, this is not only as it is, but as it should be. It can be otherwise. Now this brings in a terrific emphasis on what the tender-minded call violence. But that's what nature is, and every now and then you see something that opens your mind to this. Last year in National Geographic there was a picture that just lifted the hair on my head. It was of a gazelle being eaten by 3 cheetahs. And you had this animal lying on the ground with 3 cheetahs eating its belly while the animal was still alive and its head was lifted in a kind of plea for compassion or mercy. Now can you say to that? You've got you must save amor fati, the love of fate. And Atakasanafalodagutstorily say yes all the way. Life lives on life. That's what it is. And there are some traditions where eating human beings is part of the sacrament, you might say. But you have a different meditation when you have personified the food creature that way. You must realize that in the hunting and gathering tribal. 16. The call to adventure. World alliating is like eating human beings, because the animals are themselves life masters. They're teaching the people the way of life, and the principal rituals have to deal with gratitude and thanks to the animal that is being eaten. And these people comfort themselves in the notion that they are participating in the way of nature. In killing, in eating, in enjoying. Brown. And they're a guilt-free? Campbell. There's no guilt, there is nothing to guilty about. Because when you're in accord with nature, nature will yield its bounty. This is something that is coming up in our own consciousness now, with the ecology movement, recognizing that by violating the environment in which we are living, we are really cutting off the energy and the source of our own living. And it's this sense of accord, so that living properly in relation to what has to be done in this world, one fosters the vitality of the environment. J.B.C. Campbell. One of the big disasters for the American Indian tribes on the plains was this. Their whole religious centering was in the buffalo as the prime food, and then the buffaloes are wiped out and life loses its magic. During the 1870s and 1880s, one of the great projects in the conquest of the West was to annihilate the buffalo herds. When one sees the pictures of the buffalo plains that were done by George Catlin, 4x ample, it is incredible the multitudes of animals that were there. Well, you couldn't put railroads across that land, and you couldn't plant wheat in that land. And so, not only to clear the land, but also to relieve the Indians of their food supplies so that they'd have to go into reservations and receive handouts from the governments. The buffalo killers were sent out and the buffaloes were simply massacred. This is entirely contrary in mode and feeling to the manner in which the Indians killed buffalo. The animal skilled only insofar as is needed, and heist than worshipped ad respectus given to him. There is an attitude of gratitude. The great festival Seraphes Tivals in honor of the principal food animal. And there again is the business of accord with the natural world. 17. Once having traversed the threshold, the hero moves in a dream landscape of curiously fluid, ambiguous forms, where he must survive a succession of trials. Joseph Campbell, The Hare with a Thousand Faces. Joseph Campbell, A Portrait of the Scholar as a Young Man at the University of Paris, 1928. M9 carat, VP carat LCTF. 77 Z, O less than 3 less than I0, trials. From 1922 to 1927, Joseph Campbell lived an eclectic life as student, athlete, and traveler. He studied under Raymond Weaver at Columbia, receiving a master's degree in medieval literature in 1926, played saxophone in a college jazz band, and ran world-class times in the half mile for the Columbia track team and the New York Athletic Club. During the summers he traveled extensively with his family through Central America and Europe. On one of those excursions, a boat trip to Europe in 1924, he met the theosophical teacher Jiddu Krishnamurti, and became interested, in a vague way, in Oriental studies. In 1927, Campbell received a traveling fellowship from Columbia and went to the University of Paris to study the Arthurian romances, Old French, and Provençal. When he arrived, he found himself in the midst of Lassana folks, the crazy years of the Paris Bohemians. Asher was fond of saying later, the whole world opened up when he collided head-on with the modern art of Picasso, Brancusi, and Cayley, and the literature of Joyce, Yeats, and Eliot. After receiving an Extension 1 fellowship, he transferred to the University of Munich in 1928 to resume his studies of medieval literature but in the original German texts. Once again his interests diverged, this time from Indo-European philology to Sanskrit, medieval literature to Hinduism and Buddhism, and the works of Freud, Jung, and Thomas Mann. The postgraduate years in Europe were a confluence of the major intrigues of his life: myth, dream, and art, psychology, literature, and anthropology. 19. Carrot Brown. Did you play sports in prep school? Campbell. Oh, we had to. Later, when I taught my first carrot year at that school, I understood that when you're teaching a bunch of boys, you've got to wear them out. They've got to participate in athletics. So you send them out in the fields where they can knock each other around. In primitive societies, the violence delivered to young men in their diences prodigious and itis. Taming them. The young molly's a compulsively violent piece of biology, and do to integrate that. People talk about looking for the meaning of life. What you're really looking for is an experience of life. And one of the experiences a good fight. Remember that old Irish question: is this a private fight or can anybody get into it? It heightens your experience of being alive, being in a good fight. And that's the advantage of the experience in athletics. There's organized violence and it does everybody good. And those who can't even wiggle a finger do not least properly sit and look at it and get a certain satisfaction out of seeing people knock each other around. Campbell, third from right, playing an exuberant saxophone in a Columbia College jazz band, 1921-1922. 20. The Road of Trials. The American Mile Relay National Champions of 1925. Joseph Campbell, John Holden, Alan Helfrich, and Joe Turney, at the San Francisco IO Championships. Of his days as a premier runner, Campbell said, I think I learned more about living than what it takes to win and what it takes to lose. So I played football and hockey. I didn't like baseball, didn't play baseball. Booty was a hockey goal guard, and in football, I played guard. Guards were heavier in those days. When I was a kid, he weighed 180 pounds, so I was a good guard. And then I went to college at Dartmouth. My first year there I played tackle, and then I went to Columbia and I played end. The history of my experience at Columbia was rather funny because I came late to the training season and was scheduled for end. At the first scrimmage, on about the second pass, the ball went over the quarterback's head and he picked it up on run for a touchdown. The length of the field. So they put me on the first squad. Booty was never much of a football player. I don't think he ever got into a decent game. Track, though, Camisa surprise. I never had the ability to let someone be ahead of me. We had to talk a physical ed, as they called it. Find our track must have been 10 laps to a mile when we started out running there. 21. The Hero's Journey. Columbia has new athletic star. JOECAMPBELLNEWLIONHERO. Had MTDRERW running at Pewee Relays puts Columbia. Opening parenthesis. On Mapam Track Athletics. Th. Single quote. R tilde. Thrill says Robbie 1L, ILLFGO, RL, Ilumbia B Gers. W, TT, P. 1EXPECTSNEW880RECOR0. 1. 1. Newspaper dippings from the Cinderstar S scrapbook, a gift from his father upon graduation from Columbia. Was always someone ahead because after Elizabeth Field they were still ahead of me. When we finished it, the man in charge called me over. He happened to be the track coach. Onda said, "Have you ever thought of running?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, you can run a faster half mile than anybody on the campus. Why don't you come out for track?" So that started. And actually that was one of the great experiences of my life. Brown. You had quite a career in track. What did those years of competition teach you? 22. The road of trials. Campbell. The young men there in my years of running, and the attitude they had toward each other in competition, was beautiful. It was a beautiful manhood. I got up there in the high brackets, you know. I could run as fast a half milli as anybody in the world at that time. My years of running were exactly between the 1924 and 1928 Olympics. I had only 3 years of running, so I actually went back for my graduate degrees because I had another year of running. That was a beautiful, beautiful period. In New York way HAD indoor track meets all through the winter. After the 1924 Olympic Games, the athletes who had been winners over there were over in New York. Men like Paavo Nurmi. I've seen him run and Runadrun. Just gorgeous. A beautiful man. I think that meant more to me than anything else in my college years, the track. I think I learned more about living than any other time in my life, what it takes to win and what it takes to lose. All of that. RICHARDTARNAS. It seems that a lot of people remove aim toward their own kind of physical and spiritual disciplines nowadays, like in bodywork or like Michael Murphy with his ideas of running in altered states and higher awareness. Different people from different disciplines seem to be coming to a similar conclusion. Campbell. I've seen it all around. TARNAS. The idea of becoming the bliss and actually living that layer of being. How do I find out in our own culture? Campbell. That's our problem. In the West, the different departments of life were separated from each other, so you lose the holistic approach. You speak of the jogging the methods going in. People are beginning to realize that there is a kind of mystical bliss that comes when the body is overtaxed. I experienced this when I was running in college and a couple of years after college. See. Look back now, there were a couple of moments in the last 80 yards of the half mile when I was running in championship time. You know, you're spaced out then. If anyone would ask me what the peaks were, the high moments of my life experience. Really, zing. The whole thing in a nutshell, those races would be it, more than anything else in my whole life. Some of the things that are happening now in the West are a result of the Oriental martial arts and Asian disciplines that are coming in. The handling of the body in combat or in competition is a function, really, of a psychological posture. There has go to 23. The hero's journey. Be a still place in there, and the movement has to take place around it. I lost 2 races that were very important to me because I lost the still place. The race was so important that I put myself out there to win the race instead of to run the race. And the whole thing got thrown off. Well, this is a way of presenting of yourself and finding of yourself in relation to action. My wife, Jean, is a dancer, and dancing makes athletics look like an easy job. But here, too, centeringus. The whole thing. When you see someone come on the stage who really knows where he's, it's a different experience than someone whose body seems to be different limbs attached to a torso. It's a fantastic thing. This, I think, is coming in through the influence of the Oriental teachers. TARNAS. Some of these forms and disciplines begin to look very much like the Kundalini awakening, where people are allowed the own experience of surrendering to their own quiet place within themselves. Then something from inside begins to come out. A kind of bliss consciousness or high energy form seems to come through people. It is very similar to the Dasan Yoga that India has shot for thousands of years, but now we're coming into it in our own way. Campbell. In Kundalini Yoga there is a systemization of the possibilities of transpsychological transformation. And the first of the 3 levels, the chakra of the pelvis, represents the usual transformation from just tenacity to life, to erotic, to aggressive. But then at the level of the heart comes the transformation into the spiritual consciousness. Thesis the field of the virgin birth. And it's the symbol in the lotus of the heart center, of the lingam yoni, the male-female organ, Ingold, the new transcendent life. And then the upper chakra takes these energies and transforms them into spiritual states. If there is a Kundalini transformation, it certainly is similar. No doubt about it. Dreesen. In the Aikido tradition and discipline woo some key phrases. Be here now for yourself. Open up toi. Let it happen. It's very subtle, very difficult. I think the whole practice of martial arts is to let go of concern. Be here now for yourself, then theory is a release mechanism and that deep interpersonal acceptance. And then, wow, it comes. Brown. There's a difference between the visual process and the winning of a race, for example, and the running of the race. 24. The road of trials. Yet, if you're not Toan but you saw yours elf winning while running, in your mind while it was happening, would this kind of process have any relationship to the Kundalini phenomenology you're talking about? Campbell. It's a shift of emphasis from here to there too. What they call in the Orient the Kai. The energy comes from the lower center, Thes the Wisdom Shud Center. That's the sheath of the body's intentions and nature's intentions, and you're settled in there in your manifestations. That's just the growth of a tree. Your winning the race is a manifestation of the potentiality of the energy and powers of the body. As soon as you begin relating to other powers, that stuff up here, you soon lose your center, you lose energy that way. Brown. I've heard you say in your lectures and seminars that some of the same feeling goes into your preparing yours elphas. If, Campbell, a CFID were track meet. Well, Itis, laughs. I tell you, the 2-hour lecture is a track meet. Foe. PHILCOUSINEAU. Speaking off track, how did you become friends with Jackson Schultz, the Olympic runner? Campbell. Jackson Schultz was a sprinter, a gorgeous runner with a smooth running style. Haranthe 100 and 200. I roomed with him on 2 major occasions. In 1925 I was on the New York Athletic Club team that came to San Francisco for the American Athletic Union Championships, and Schultz was my roommate then. The year before, Schultz had won 200 meters in the Paris Olympics and had gone around the world with a couple of other athletes, and all he could talk about was Hawaii. In those days it was a 4.5-day train ride from New York to San Francisco, and there I was with Schultz talking about Hawaii. I thought, well, why don't I just drop this team and go to Hawaii? And he said, go ahead. So this was how I first visited Hawaii. When Schultz had been there he had met the Kahanamoku family. What it did was wonderful. Hero to people in Hawaii to meet me. When I 25. The Hero's Journey. Joseph Campbell, Bottom, and friends on Waikiki Beach in the summer of 1925. While there, Campbell learned to surf with the Father O.J. Surfing, himself, the legendary Duke Kahanamoku, came out on the boat after my 4.5 days. It docked off in the water waiting for the quarantine officials to come out. You could smell the islands with the flower sandal. God, you were just captured. The boat moved into Thetic, where the Royal Hawaiian Band was playing, Aloha. And there was a little pennant above the crowd that read, Aloha, Joe Campbell. Well, we had won everything in San Francisco, and SOI. Thought, thesis inadequate reception. But of course it was the chap who had come to meet me who had the pennant. I went ashore and met Schultz's friend and brought me to a hotel, the Hotel Cortland. Many years later I learned that it was 1 block from Jin's residence. She was a little girl taking halal lessons in the very hotel where I was living. All I did that summer was wait for the trolley, that tune. Ervil, trolley. They had to go to Waikiki and spend the day on Duke Kahanamoku surfboard. No, it's in the Bishop Museum. It was a sheet as I could reach with my hand, made of koa wood. Well, I was a trackman. I didn't have anything of here in the chest, so I couldn't even propel it in the water. But it was the surfboard that was given to him by David Kahanamoku, so I would lug it down to the water, get on the thing, and swim it out to where the waves were, and then for the rest of the daily out and try to catch a wave. One fine day David came out on the board and he said, "You wanna catch a wave?" And he said, "I can't get this thing going." So he says, "All right, I'll give you a little push." So I got a push from David, and he tell you being on that surfboard was like being on the Queen Elizabeth E. That was my one great ride. I went to Europisa student for my graduate work in 1927. The next Olympics was 1928 and Jackson Schultz was over there. So I roomed with him for my first several weeks in Paris. And then when he came back again for the Olympics I saw him some more. It's funny. When you get on an sad look back and realize the role that certain people have played in your life, it's surprising. And Schultz, I think, was one of the major people. Sometimes it's just that little kick that brought you onto this path instead of detone. I haven't seen him since those days. Hugh Feynman. 26. The Road of Trials. Foe. P9. Cusino. You once said that when you were a young man you wanted to be a synthesis of Leonardo da Vinci and Doug Los Fairbanks. Were they your next heroes after Buffalo Bill? Campbell. When I was Socket Douglas Fairbanks was a magnificent performer and a beautiful man doing fantastic things. There was one great show where Fairbanks was apparate and somebody was chasing him up the mast of a boat. Then Hedekeshi's knife and puts it in the sail and he comes down that sail like this. I'll never forget this. Where do she get this? Well, a guy who can do that kind of thing. In respect to the world of the intellect I was never interested in small, specialized studies. I think they tend to dehumanize you. In his wonderful, majestic translation of everything into human values, Leonardo da Vinci seemed to me to represent what I was looking for. When I was in prep school I was interested in biology and mathematics, and that was also true in my freshman year in Dartmouth. But in the interval between my freshman and sophomore year somebody gave me Dmitri Marikowski's Theramance of Leonardo da Vinci. That is what turned me in. My God, I discovered that I didn't know anything about the world of art and culture. And civilization. I knew about American Indians but not about art and civilization. My whole world shifted with that book. Cousineau. What did you mean when you say that in your studies of the Celtic Arthurian romances you understood your Irish Catholic background in a new way? Campbell. The Arthurian romances are right out of the Celtic world. They are transformations of Celtic heroes of Amedi. Of Al Knights. Every single one of them has a Celtic background. My affinity for the material I'm sure has to do with me actual inheritance. And then the fact that James Joyce grabbed me. You know, that wonderful living in a realm of significant fantasy, which is Irish, is there in the Arthurian romances. It's in Joyce, and it's on my life. Cousineau. Did you find that you identified with Ste. Fen Dedalus, the young romantic rebel who lived in silence, exile, and cunning? In Joyce's A Portrait of Artist as a Young Man? When you open a Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, my copy I bought back in Paris in 1927, on the title page we see in Latin, Ediniotas, Annuum Domititan, Arts, Onda, turned his mind to unknown art. The name of the hero is Stephen Dedalus, who created Wings of Art by which he flew. Joseph Campbell. 27. The Hero's Journey. James Joyce in Dublin at AGE 20. Campbell was nearly the same age, 23, when He discovered Joyce's groundbreaking novel Ulysses in Paris in 1927. His problem was me. Problem, exactly. And the problem is when you're deeply built into the system and you are losing your faith. It's no gin. Campbell. His problem was my problem, exactly. And the problem is when you're deeply built into the system of the church and you are losing your faith. It's no fun. I mean, it started when I was studying biology. There's absolutely no relationship between the biological evolution of the human species, the animal and plant world, and what you get in the book of Genesis. And in those days we were supposed to be believing in this stupid literacy of a text that goes back to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th millennium B.C. And how can you go through life with that? Well, I couldn't anyhow. And yet this other thing had been built in. The problem was to work it out without losing the symbols. Joyce helped it release mind to an understanding of the universal sense of these symbols. The deep human sense. Not the anecdotal historical symbolization of the sense of these great universal symbols that come to us through our Christian heritage. Boot on the wings offered, an opening out of a mythological reading of these symbols. So Joyce disengaged himself and left the labyrinth, you might say, of Irish politics and the church to go to Paris, where he became one of the very important members of this marvelous movement that Paris represented in the period when I was there, in the 20s. The thing that saved me was the Upanishads, Hinduism, where you have practically the same mythology, but it has been intellectually interpreted. That is to say, already in the 9th century BC the Hindus realized that all of the deities are projections of psychological powers, and they are within you, not out there. They're out the real so in a certain way, in a mysterious way, but the real place for Themis in here, points to heart. Boy, that saved the whole day. Foe. Brown. When did that realization first dawn on you? Campbell. Now when did I? In 1924 when I was around 19 years old. And it came in a very interesting way. I was on a boat trip with my family to Europe. Route to take 28. The road of trials. The slower boat, not the big ones that get you across in about 5 days, but head and day crossings, because it was such fun on those boats. First class boats like the President Harding, President this, that, and the other. On the return trip from Europe, in 1924, there were 3 dark young men seated in steamer chairs on the deck. I noticed that there was a young woman who knew them. I had never seen such people before because we never saw Hindus over here at that time. Never. They all ended up in England, they never got to the United States. It happened that one of them was Jiddu Krishnamurti, and the others were his brother Nityananda and his secretary at the time, Rahagopal. This was my introduction to the world of India. And the young woman who introduced me gave me Edwin Arnold's The Light of Asia, which is the life of the Buddha from the sutras. And that was the opening up, and it was like a light going on. When I went to Europe as a student of literature, philology, Romance literature, and Hento Germany and started my Sanskrit, there was all this stuff again. I really go tinto it in those years. But it had started with what I learned from that little book about the Buddha. Strange, just a little touch like that and everything changes. I had the earlier change with the romance of Leonardo da Vinci. My whole world shifted with that book. Then latter this little one on the Buddha added another dimension. You know, you have to have some kind of silly thing out in front of you to keep you on the line, something difficult to do. Jiddu Krishnamurti, 1935. Brown. How did your years of study in Europe influence you when you were awarded a traveling fellowship from Columbia? Campbell. I was over there first in Paris and then in Moon. 1 year in each, and the whole world opened up. Those were the late 20s, 27, 28, 29, and you'll be surprised, laughs. I mean Americans know are so aware of what's going on in the rest of the world that you can't realize what it was like when I was a young. 29. The Hero's Journey. Joseph Campbell and his sister Alice in Chartres, France, in 1928, the parish HI considered his spiritual home. Self-portrait in his atelier. Photographed by Romanian sculptor Constantin Brancusi, circa 1933. The painter Henri Rousseau once told Brancusi, "Well, old boy, you made the ancients modern." Man there. The discovery of modern art happened when I was in Paris. I'll never forget the moment going into a grand gallery in the Bois de Boulogne. They had built a big exhibition place for the independents, the intransigents, artists who were not showing in the official galleries. And these happened to be men. Like Picasso, and Matisse, and Miro, and Brancusi. And the whole lot. I remember seeing Brancusi bird in flight the first time it was exhibited, and walking around it was Raymond Duncan dressed like a Greek. Well, I had come over from good ole rural America, you might say, and this whole world off our out, avant-garde, well. Bohemian was totally new, and my opening up to the world of art and its relationship to my life took place there. Faux PQ. 30. The Road of Trials. Campbell. The whole discovery came to mind that moment at the University of Paris. I had gone over on the straight and narrow path of scholarship. I was living in a little room on the Rue de Style, which is way down at the other end of the boulevard Montparnasse. And here was the university over on the Boule Michi. So what did I have to pass going from my little room to the university? I had to pass Montparnasse Raspail. On Dean those days there was La Coupeline La Dome and everything, all these bizarre places. Now I had just come from the United States. And my dear friends, in those days we'd never seen anything like that. We had no idea what modern art was about. And there was also a big blue book in all the bookstores. Ulysses. Nobody in the United States had one. I had to smuggle my copy back into the country. So I went into one of the bookstores and said, "Avez-vous Ulysses?" "Mysoi, monsieur." And when I comito chapter 3, ineluctable modality of the visible, at least that if no more, thought through my eyes. Signatures of all things I am here to read, I thought, good God, what is this? I thought I had got my degree. Booty don't know what he's talking about. So I went around to the Place de l'Odéon, and there was Shakespeare and Company, and there was Sylvia Beach. I went and asked an indignant young academic and asked, what kind of writing is this, and so forth. Well, she told me what kind of writing it was, and she sold me a lot of books. That changed my career. Now when you've gone through Ulysses 3 or 4 times and you know where you are, it's very exciting because it's all protein. There's no fat, there's no carbohydrates. You've just got the sheer experience right in front of you, and it is a delight to read it over and over and over and over. I've never had that with any other author, that kind of experience. I bought this book in Paris in 1927 and have been reading it ever since. And it's a delight every time. Shortly after that I met a young sculptress from New Orleans named Angela Gregory who was working with Antoine Bourdelle. And you know how sculptors are, they are always wanting someone to pose the canvas work. So she asks me if I would sit down and let her do my head. Oh, sure, I said. So I went around to the studio and there. Bust of Joseph Campbell, AGE 23, 1927, by Angela Gregory. You know how sculptors are, Campbell said. They are always wanting someone to pose the canvas work. So she asks me if I would sit down and let her do me head. Oh sure, I said. 3. 1. The Hero's Journey. The Secret of Artists. Love. Art brings out the grand lines of nature. Antoine Bourdelle. French sculptor Antoine Bourdelle beside his monumental work, Hercules. Biasing the archetypes, Bourdelle felt that the artist recreates the world. The secret of art is love, he said. Art brings out the grand lines of nature. Was this magical man, Antoine Bourdelle? He was in his middle 80s or so. To hear that man then talking about art and what art was about. Own a phrase of his got to me mind, and it's been there as a kind of a guiding phrase ever since. L'art fait ressortir grandes lines de la nature. Art brings out the grand lines of nature. And this is what my THS are also about. 32. The Road of Trials. So I'm sitting in the Sorbonne working on Provençal, Old French, the Celtic influences on Arthurian romance. I think. Good God, I don't even know how to order it simply in a restaurant. It was embarrassing. Here I am learning all this stuff. Finally one day in the Cluny Gardens near the university, a flash went up, and this is what carried me off the straight and narrow. Into the woods. My theme of following your bliss into the forest adventures. I had no idea where I was going, but there was Joyce. Later Sylvia Beach sold me the journal, Transitions, where some of the earlier versions of Finnegan's Wake were appearing under the title, Work in Progress. To give a 1/80th difference, the first sentence was, River Run brings us back to Howth Castle and environs. And Hen when I bought Finnegan's Wake years later, it began, River Run, past Evendottoms, by swerve of shore to bend of bay, brings Seuss by Accommodious Vicus of recirculation back to Howth Castle and environs. Thesis what had happened to Joyce in 20 years. Well, Old French seemed rather dull at that time. This was a world of translating the learning, because no one in the world knew more than what James Joyce knew of what I was trying to find out. To translate technology and information into experience, that seems tome the function of literature and art. And it was with that I made the step not to becoming an artist but to find what the experience would be in the material that I was dealing with. And Joyce certainly helped. Then he went the next year, fall of 1928, to Munich. There, I discovered what we didn't know in the United States at that time. I discovered Sigmund Freud, I discovered Carl Jung, I discovered Thomas Mann, and he started my study of Sanskrit. One of the wonderful things about coming all at once out of the realm of Columbia University into the world of what one of my professors called the castle of German scholarship, and Sanskrit at the same time, was an awakening that you can't imagine. And there it was that I found what the depths were in the richness of the world that I had been dealing with Arthurian romance and the Celtic material that I had loved ever since early boyhood, and the American Indian myths where the same motifs existed. The thing I learned as a boy when I was excited about the Indians and as you've in that wonderful forest country of the Poconos in Pennsylvania was that the function of myth and the function of Indian lore was to move in accord with nature, and the function. There is Onaphrasin, Finnegan's Wake that seems to epitomize the whole sense of Joyce. He says, O Lord, keep us iri supponus, but entwine our arts with laughter's low. And thesis the sense of the Buddhist bodhisattva, joyful participation in the sorrows of the world. Joseph Campbell. 33. The Hero's Journey of Artist O bring out the grand lines of nature. Soita's own grandiose song that I found. Fo. Cusino. Which really did the learning of language play in your years as a young scholar in Europe. Campbell. Oh, now, these are the things that I really want to talk about. I think our educational system, at least when I was in school, was just no good. We spent so much time learning languages. French and Spanish were what we had learned. Languages you never heard spoken and the percent teaching you couldn't speak the language you were learning. You were learning Jesui, Tuesday, il est, ellist, that sort of thing, but nothing of the swing of the language. When I went to Europe as a student I had been studying French since kindergarten, but really had no grasp of the language. I went to the Alliance Française, in Paris, and in 3 months was speaking and reading French and understanding it. I had never studied German, but when I learned that all the real learning in Europa was in Germany, I wrote to Columbia and asked if they'd give me a fellowship to go the next year to Germany. They said, yes, go ahead. So I had to learn German. In 3 months I could read and talk German. When you're in the place saturated and it's in the melody of your life, the languages come through. When I graduated from prep school I thought, God, I hope I never have to study a foreign language again. But going deeper into that world was a rapture. Every language carries a whole range of experiences that are epicular. I'm having a very interesting experience right now. A couple of my books are being translated and published in German. 1. Myths to Live By, is a rather popular and easy book. I had the experience about a month ago of reading the German translation of that thing, and boy, was that a different book. So many of the ideas that have come out of the German slide back into German very easily. But hey, acquire something different just in going back into German, which is a poetic language, a mystical language, whereas English is a practical language. Quitty different realm of 34. The Road of Trials. Dimension. Suddenly my writing was saying what I had really meant to say, and he hadn't realized it. I read back into English again and back into the German, and the realms of association and implication of the words was exciting. The discovery of German was a real event in my life. The whole poetic majesty of the language is something that just caught me. I love it. I had gone over there to work on medieval philology, Old French Provençal, and the Arthurian romances and troubadour poetry, but, my God, everything opened out in all directions. Then, in Germany came the Sanskrit and that wonderful philological background of the German scholarship. There is nothing like it in the world. The Germans were the first to find out about these things. Goethe was already there 150 years ago, and the romantics around that period were, as they say now, intuit. But we have so much more material now than those people had in those days. When I was a student in Germany, the metaphysical aspect of what I was studying broke open form. I'd been working on mythology, and particularly medieval mythology, just in the way of a Western scholar. Then Reninto Goethe, Reninto Thomas Mann, Reninto Jung, and suddenly I realized the mythic dimension of these things, not simply the academic circus. Consequently I have a very deep feeling for that country. Foca P9. Campbell. In 1936 there was a very amusing occasion. Thomas Mann was invited to give the talk at the party in honor of Freud's 80th birthday. Now how anyone could have a thought that an artist could talk about anyone but himself, I can't imagine. And it was amusing. Thomas Mann started by saying he didn't understand why he had been invited to do this because he was an artist, a creator, and not a scientist, not an analyst. So he said, Well, perhaps what people wanted was a Saturnalia, a topsy-turvy evening where the one who usually is the object becomes the subject, and instead of a talk based on practical science, and so forth, we have one of dream. Like penetration. Now you know in a Saturnalia everything is topsy-turvy. The servants are commanding their employer sand a clown. Had the pleasure of meeting man 3 times, and being with him for a long period. At one of those meet. Ings. Huisaman. In form, and was very formalinese. Manner. Booted was with case. Like writing ing sonnets or job a necessity ceremony, you have to know the form, and so master the form that you can be at ace with it. This is an important point in art. You don't have an artist. Who doesn't have a technique? Joseph Campbell 35. The Hero's Journey. Thomas Mann, early 1950s. Is appointed the judge of the city, and so forth, and everything is sort of upside down. So this was a warning that Mann was going to be a little rough. The paper that was published of this talk is called Freud and the Future. And it had almost nothing to do with Freud. Mann began by saying that the real achievement of Freud was thought they had, through his researches, reproduced in medical terms all of the findings of the German Romantic philosophers of the 19th century. Even though Freud had never read any of these. He did not know not Schopenhauer, says Mann. He did not know Nietzsche. He did not know S0 Ren, Kierkegaard, and he out of his own rants on his own boa that had reproduced the whole thing. Then he said, no, if you will pardon me for talking about myself, I will show that in my works, long before I heard of Freud. I was already working in this mode, and the end he spoke of his own. Early short story, Die kleine Herr Friedman, Little Mr. Fried Man. This was published in 1886 or 1897, 3 or 4 years before. Freud's interpretation of dreams. And it's a fact that in that little story you get a good deal of Freudian information, or information that Freud produced elsewhere in another language and with a totally different slant. About halfway through the lecture man mentioned the unutterable name, Jung, and how Jung inspired the works that he was doing now, which wash as Joseph novels. He had just then finished volume E. 36. The Road of Trials. I can't imagine what went in that room while he was doing this. Now, I bring this up because I disavory goodal audiento the whole context of what was going on in the real Mofunkenskias research in the first half of the century. This was a wonderful period in the arts. Joyce and Mann, completely ignorant of each other, simultaneously went through a transition in their novels, in their writings, from what might be called 19th century naturalism through the psychological accent given in their works to a breakthrough in myth. Then the First World War comes along, 1914 to 1918, and immediately after it the C. Pochel works appear. Joyce's Ulysses in 1922, Mann's Magic Mountain in 1924, and both of this pretended to be naturalistic works. But here we are structured on a mythological base, and the mythological structure was given to you in Acu in the title, Ulysses and the Magic Mountain. Then I slide right into the whole sea of my thin ear next great works, Thomas Mann Joseph novels and James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. The contrast between Joyce and Mann is interesting. Joyce was an Irish Catholic, and Thomas Mann had been Barotuba, German Protestant. Insofar as you take the religion seriously, you're living in immediate relationship Thomas. And the problem then is to relate your experiences when you move into the world to this mythological ground, to see the world in terms of those structures which have been put into you in the beginning. Thomas Mann comes the other way around. One of the characteristics of Protestantism, I would say, is that it rejects the ritual and mythological interpretation and accent in the religion. And S.O. Mann comes gradually into a realization of the mythological depths and what they implied. It took him a long time. This gave, less than B versus, Carrot, happened to know the woman who was responsible for bringing the Mann family over here. Mrs. Eugene Meyer. She was the wife of the owner of the Washington Post in those days. When I recognized that Van's Casterstream was a repetition of the last paragraph of Nietzsche's Berthoff tragedy, asked Mrs. Meyer if she had recognized this, and if Mann had ever spoken to her about it. She said, I will tell me next time I see him. About 3 weeks later I got a letter from her saying, I asked him about the scene from The Birth of Trag. Edianda was stunned. He had never realized what he had on. Thesis known as cryptomnesia. The brain doesn't forget things, but your attention may be so far away from that you will have forgotten, but there it is. And you're at the last paragraph of The Birth of Tragedy you'll best in it too. Joseph Campbell. The Hero's Journey. Joyce a kind of advantage in that there was a professional in mythological thinking, right from infancy, and Mann comes gradually into it. And this makes the two of them an extraordinarily interesting pair to bring together. Foe. Campbell. In The Magic Mountain Thomas Mann is continually explaining the implication of his mythology. He gives you the image and there is an interpretation that's given you one way. Or the other. Joyce does nothing of the kind. Joyce just gives it you. Bing L. Like that, and you get a working to it. So I have always found in my own reading and thinking about these matters that the set women complement each other in an extraordinarily interesting way. Their approach toward it is also interesting. In the ear backgrounds are the German philosophers of the 19th century. Wagner, of course, was a very important influence in the years of the ear growing up. Both of them took some themes from Wagner. One of the musical devices Wagner used is that of the leitmotif, the returning echo, the cliché that is associated with a certain body of meaning and system of associations that recurs, and every time it recurs the whole meaning of it comes back again in new relationships. For Thomas Mann this was a device, and anyone was Freeman's Buddenbrooks. For instance, or any of his early short stories has recognized this. When he mentions a character he will always mention some little context of adjectives or commentary to the has mentioned before with respect to this character. Sutherholding Commersiniganast leitmotif. Joyce, who was Avery musical person, also used the musical device. As or current refrain. One of the great disappointments of his life was that in a singing contest in Dublin, headed and win, John McCormack won. Now the trick for hardest to present this material so that it doesn't put a ring around itself and stand theory separate from you, the observer. And that that you get when you see an artwork that really hits you is, I am that. I am the radiance and energy that is talking tone through this painting. In purely impure. I cal terms it's called participation. But it's more than that, it's identification. 38. The Road of Trials. Now what man tried to do when he turned to mythology wa store interpret Genesis in terms of the elementary ideas that are implicate in the ethnic ideas of the Bible. It's a very important work and it's the only way to translate the Judeo-Christian heritage into a heritage for mankind instead of for a certain group. Do you get my point? It's a big on. This is what man is working on, this is what Jung is working on, this is what Joyce is working on, this is what everyone is working on who is trying to retain the positive values that are in this heritage, and at the same time move it with global period of life where we don't isolate ourselves and say everybody else is worshipping devils. Now what one must cometh of Indies how the artist, how Joyce, how man, has broken through and rendered this mystery. One way is through the rhythms of their prose. This is a problem of poetry. The poet is breaking you past the image, breaking you past the words so that things should point past themselves. Rhythm has a lot to do with this. And so is the secret of man's art. The absolutely ruthless eye, which sends the arrow of the correct word on in the faultond and the arrow is an ointment of love. This he calls erotis irony. He also calls it plastic irony, and it's the secret to Thomas Mann's art. Now the function of art, and it was Shakespeare who said, it's that, art holds a mirror to nature. Art holds, you might say, a holographic mirror up to nature so that you can see that in this objectus the totality. Each is a totality in itself. And this is the way these men deal with their characters. It was Schopenhauer who was the first to bring Oriental